Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and I'm here with a special episode recorded at this year's New York Comic Con. It's one I've been trying to put together for years, and while it's much shorter than usual, I think it's well worth a listen. It's with the writer of comics like Saga, Paper Girls, Y the Last Man, and many more. That's right. Writer Brian K. Vaughan is on the podcast this week, and it's a great chat about his approach to comics, fandom, and a whole lot more. Give it a listen, and shouts to Image Comics for helping me finally set this one up. Here it is. Yo, everybody. This is David Harper at New York Comic Con, and I'm here with the writer of comics like Paper Girls, Saga, The Private Eye, and many more. This is Brian K. Vaughan. Brian, how's the con going for you?
It's amazing. It's a little bit overwhelming, but yeah, I'm having a great time.
So I'm going to start in a very strange place. So this is probably a story you hear a lot, which I think is really interesting. But so I stopped reading comics for like 3 years. Back when I was like 17, 18, I was in high school and I wasn't sure about reading comics anymore. And during that gap, I went back and I went to a comic shop and I was like, should I start reading? And this clerk talked me into reading Y the Last Man. So that was like the comic that got me back into it. And so when I was thinking about my like story with like your works and everything like that, it kind of made me realize that I feel like your work brings in a lot of like lapsed readers and new readers and things like that. Now, I mean, it's not like something you can really plan, obviously, but is that something like, are you trying to deliberately be pretty welcoming and like anybody's first comic could be one of your comics? Is that something you kind of aim for to speak to with your comics?
From the very beginning, absolutely. Yeah, just because it meant so much to me whenever I was in a relationship. I love comics. They're such an important part of my life, and I always try to share them with girlfriends who would inevitably be relatively new to the medium. And yeah, you just found out very quickly, I think what we take for granted as seasoned comic readers is that a comic book, it is not always the most inviting thing. It can be difficult just to read. People don't even know where their eyes are supposed to go. And like, do I read the words first or the pictures? And I just always remember Preacher and seeing how everyone loved Preacher. And it's not just a credit to Garth Ennis, who's one of the best writers alive, but Steve Dillon, his storytelling was so crystal clear. And that is a really, really difficult thing to do. To tell an immersive, propulsive narrative story with just 4 or 5 pictures a page is hard. But yeah, I remember with Y the Last Man, Pia, Gara, and I, it's something we talked a lot about we wanted to make a comic. If the only comic you've ever read is Peanuts or Calvin and Hobbes, that you will be able to read our book. So yeah, it's definitely something I try to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things a lot of people in comics don't think about a lot is there is like a bit of a barrier to entry. Like when I went to a shop for the first time with my wife, she was like, "Where do you start?" And like that can be a tough thing. But I do think that, and I don't know, I mean, maybe this is deliberate, but one of the things that I think works really well with your work is that because so much of it is creator owned, like whether you're talking about your image stuff or working with Marcos on Panel Syndicate stuff, is like creator owned. You don't need to know decades of history to be able to figure out.
Yes.
Do you think that plays a big part in it?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's difficult when like someone goes to see the Ant-Man movie and they love it and they go to a comic book store. Where do you begin? You know, there's so many different choices. And yeah, it's something with Saga or Y the Last Man. I never wanted to renumber or anything or do miniseries. I want you to know, here's a story. You start with this first chapter and you can read it straight through to the end. You don't need to do any homework before doing it. That's something else very important to me.
Yeah, I remember when, it wasn't even, the current gap for Saga, but it was like just during a break. And I remember somebody at Image tweeting out about the fact that like somebody had asked them like, why don't you just get a fill-in artist, for Fiona being gone? But it's like, if Fiona's not there, what is Saga? I mean, that's like, I don't know. It's core to the identity of the book.
Yeah, and I think that's something that it was apparent from the first page she drew that, Saga would not be Saga if someone else drew it. But yeah, the comic sort of treadmill requires this, like, you have to keep the monthly train going. And I think Image was afraid at the beginning when we announced we're going to do this plan, we'll do 6 issues and then take 3 months off. They're like, retailers might not order the book, like, it might be the end of us. And I'm so grateful that it turned out that I think the readers agreed with us that they would be willing to wait for Fiona. And especially now that so many people discovered the collections, it's just so nice to have that consistency. So yeah, I'm very grateful that it's worked out.
I think one of the interesting things about where you're at currently is because you've had so much success, and like with that comes like, you have an ability that some creators don't have to do things like a little bit different. So like you have the big break for Saga, going renegade with Panel Syndicate, which I've talked to Marcos a lot about. You did a bilingual story in Barrier. I mean, like that stuff is amazing. Do you find that having these opportunities makes you want to try things a little bit different to see what might work a little bit better?
Yeah, definitely. It felt like, at each turn, I remember like George W. Bush talking about I've got some capital to spend when he was reelected, and it feels like, yeah, you have a little capital to spend, so don't just do what's expected. Do something that feels like it's a little bit of a bigger swing. Paper Girls doing a story with 4 prepubescent female protagonists it's like, well, I'm going to follow up Saga with this. If I could just do anything, and sort of economy was not a concern. It was that, and yeah, as you point out with Barrier, similarly, I think that's a big credit to Marcos. He's such a contrarian that I would pitch him multiple ideas, and he's like, that sounds like too many people will like it. And as soon as I was like, what if it's a book that half of it is in a language that readers might not speak? And he's like, perfect. That's what I'm looking for. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of Marcos, I mean, I love all of your collaborators. I mean, like, Cliff, Marcos, Fiona, those are some of my absolute favorite people in comics. But there's only so much you can know going into a project, but how much, as you're moving along, like how much do you try to like fine tune and like lean into their strengths? Because each of them have like completely different strengths.
It's wild, especially when I was at a point where I was working with them all simultaneously. You just feel so promiscuous as a writer. Like they're all trapped in this relationship with you, but you get to go out and learn. And yeah, it's this platonic marriage that you enter into, and each relationship is wildly different. Just like the way that I work with Fiona is very different from the way I work with Cliff or Marcos. And I love that the end result I'm always so pleased with, but how you get there is definitely not the same for each book.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say it's like if you gave 10 different artists the same page of a script, it would turn out completely differently. And like, I mean, you put in a project and it starts evolving. I mean, like, look at like, from what I understand, like Goose wasn't meant to be a big deal, but then Fiona made like the most adorable design that's ever existed.
Yeah, no, Goose actually didn't exist at all until it was not related to Saga. Fiona just drew him on her own and said, I drew this little guy, can he be in the book? And I was like, not only can he be in the book, he's suddenly a vitally important part of the book, and I can't imagine the book without him. So yeah, it's not just like, oh, they each interpret my scripts differently. They are equal co-authors in the book, and they're all excellent writers in their own right. So yes, I'm just tremendously fortunate.
I'm going to take you way back to when you first were getting Saga started. So I was a huge fan of Fiona for North 40.
Oh, yeah, great book.
I mean, it's funny. It was like one of those books where I was just like, everyone needs to watch out for this Fiona Staples because she is absolutely incredible. What was it about her art that made you want to work with her?
Yeah, I think, I'd seen some of her Wildstorm work and loved it. It was just clear that I like anytime there's an artist that you can't see their influences, that they feel very original, which she was. But I remember then I think I just put in Google image search her name, and the first 2 things that came up was like an incredibly sexy, dirty Vampirella image, and then this lovely drawing of Boba Fett from the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Okay.
And it was just so nerdy, but like she just drew Boba Fett with, he just had so much dignity riding this silly dragon. And I just, you got the sense in these 2 images of just like everything that Fiona is about. And I just saw so much potential there. And I mean, clearly she's one of the best artists alive. So I'm just so fortunate that, she hadn't, it's crazy that she wasn't already scooped up by the big 2 and doing a major book yet. And so I'm just very lucky.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that she could do Saga and Archie basically at the same time right after the start. I mean, that's the thing that like people I don't think of about the hiatus is like the fact that, she was doing those two things at the same time for a bit. She was doing covers. She was doing hand lettering for Hazel stuff. I mean, like, if anybody in comics deserved a break, it was Fiona Staples.
It's true. I don't think there's ever been, an artist who's, from the cover image to, it was done that many issues in a row. Every aspect of it is, it's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah. So I did want to ask a quick question about Paper Girls. Well, maybe not quick. We'll see. But I loved it. I thought the ending of it was just amazing. And when I had Cliff on my podcast recently, and when I was getting ready for it, I was like looking through the first hardcover, and I was just like, wait a second, there are like so many things that are referenced in the last issue that are like in the first issue. So this is one of those like magic of comic things. Were those things like Tiffany having the previous costumes of like the astronaut and the devil, and then like the station wagon? Were those elements like baked in from the beginning? Those were?
Yeah, and there's the nice thing about comics and about the length of this, that we knew this isn't going to be 60 issues like Why the Last Man. It's going to be 30, and it was a controllable shape, so we really were able. And it's one of the burdens of time travel is you really can't make it up as you go along,
right,
and have it be satisfying for readers, that you have to have your setups and payoffs all carefully planned. So, I think I'm sure there were some things that came up that we hadn't thought of, but for the most part, it was really pretty planned out from the get-go.
This is like just the emotional man in me, but I was just hoping for a happy ending for the girls, so that was really nice. Like I liked where it went.
Thanks. Yeah, it was definitely. I know I do some real bummer endings sometime, and certainly this is. I think there are aspects of the story that are still deeply sad, and but it's telling that people are like, "Wow, Brian, this is your happiest ending yet for a book," and yes, it's still. I think has a lot of sorrow in it, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's interesting because it's like Why the Last Man. Like that's it's a sad ending, but it's like cathartic. And then I think that there's like, it's always more complex than just like sad or happy. There's always like multitudes to it, I guess.
Thanks. Thank you.
So this is kind of like a weird time for you because it's like Paper Girls just ended. Yeah. Saga's on a break. The only thing you really have coming out is there's like the release of The Walking Dead, The Alien, coming out in print for local comic shop day.
Yes, which will be fun.
Which is it was a great comic. But I'm sure you're actually really quite busy, but is it, I don't know. I was commenting on something. I was like, I feel like this is the first time you haven't done anything for a while, but you're probably still really busy. But is it nice to be able to get reacquainted to like real life for a bit when you're not trying to do everything?
Yeah, no, I've been writing comics for 22 years, and I'm already back at work on Saga. But before it was the longest I'd taken away from writing comics. Since I'd say before Saga, after my kids were born, I took a break, and I just think part of the reason Saga worked is I was able to step away from comics, which is a luxury almost none of my contemporaries have. We're always working on the next thing, and you're never taking a break. And it was just so life-giving and perspective-giving to just be able to step away and realize this is what I miss about it, and here's something I want to challenge myself that I wasn't doing. So, I'm grateful for getting to take a break. And I know certainly Fiona is too. But I hope people will see when this comes back, like, oh, I wish more creators would take a break because, I think we're coming back pretty goddamn sharp.
Well, I mean, it's not like you ended on like an easy place to jump from. It's like I imagine there's some things you have to kind of figure out in the translation because it's like there's a new world order, and it's like, it might not be the exact same book. Obviously, you can't say much about it, but at the same time, it is interesting because it's like that time away probably helps you figure out where you want to go in a way that you wouldn't be able to do on like a normal monthly schedule or even the Saga schedule.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's less, I've always known what the final page or the final issue of Saga is going to be, and I know sort of what the major signposts are. So it was less about, oh, we need to take time away to figure out what the hell is going to happen, and more, we need to take a step away to ask ourselves, why are we telling this story, and how are we going to tell it to the best of our abilities?
Yeah. I was talking with an artist earlier, and he was talking about how he's been so busy with like commissions and with pages and doing all these other projects that he hasn't had any time to just like kind of draw for himself or even take time away from it. And it just like, it reduces his ability to get better at drawing. And I think that's one of the interesting things about like being a creator is like, if you don't have that little bit of time away, it's like it's not that like you're degrading, but you just can't improve. which is, I don't know, kind of an interesting position that we don't think of.
It's a secret fear of mine that, I mean, everyone knows the old cliche about you have 10,000 pages of garbage in you that you have to sort of get out of your system as quickly as possible, which I absolutely think is true. But my fear is that after you get out those 10,000 bad pages, there might also be a limited number of good pages left as well. And so I'm trying to use up my hopeful 10,000 pages of acceptable writing on things I'm only incredibly passionate about.
That'll be Malcolm Gladwell's next book. It's
Exactly.
like 10,000 hours,
Yeah.
and it's like 20,000 is the cap.
That's right. And then you should just take a beekeeping or something after that.
That would be really nice.
I'm thinking about it.
So last questions I want to ask about is, we're at a con. It's all about community. I love all the things that you've done in like Saga and Paper Girls to encourage community. Like in Saga, like To Be Continues, like an amazing letters column. You actually require people to mail you stuff, which is amazing. I'm actually a card-carrying American Newspaper Delivery Guild member.
Love it. It's
Yeah.
great.
And you actually convinced me to tear a part out of a comic, which made me,
Oh,
like, as a kid, I still protect comics.
get it.
But I did it, and I mailed that in.
Thank
and, like,
you.
these are things that are atypical, but I think it binds people to your books in a way, like, when I was a kid, like I would read the letters column in Marvel and stuff like that, and you felt like you're part of something. Was that type of reader engagement something you and your collaborators really wanted to kind of tap into?
Yeah, I know for me, I just remember it was really a two-letter column. This Preacher, the back of that, like just getting to sort of, Garth Ennis has since become a good friend, but like you felt like you knew him reading this and you liked the kind of people who liked his book. It was just such a great, and it was sort of mercenary. And then I know it made me like, I'm not going to wait for the trades. I want this as such an important part of it as well. So that was a big one. And then I think Adrian Tominay's letter column in the back of Optic Nerve is just so funny. And he usually rarely responds to it. But I know he had a P.O. box. And it's something I wanted to steal because I was like, hey, you get such interesting correspondence compared to email where people can just dash off, why did you kill this character? Or I hate you. Or people, like, they won't waste a stamp unless they have something really cool to say. So it is life-giving to go to my dumb P.O. box once a week, and there's just correspondence, like physical mail from people. It never gets old. So yeah, that is, as long as I'm doing a monthly book, I will do that.
It is funny how there's like, you put like a little barrier to entry to it, and all of a sudden, like, all of the unhappy people kind of like disappear.
It's true. It's not all of them, but many. But
Yeah.
But yes, much fewer if you're going to waste. I don't even know how much a stamp's cost. It's just amazing to find people are like, it was really hard to even find a stamp, or I've never even I pay my bills online. A lot of people have never used the United States Postal Service until now. So
You have like a very younger audience. You might be training an entire generation
I like to think
on USPS. That's pretty amazing.
keeping them alive.
Well, I think it's like hugely valuable, and especially it's like tonight is like Awake for the Wicked and the Divine, like
Yeah.
a comic book series, which is like really it's like a big deal party, and like I think that is such an amazing like look at like how people have connected with like there's like this generation of Image comics that really connected with a huge audience. Do you see that the kind of engagement you all do with readers like making a difference with readers and like how you engage with them at cons or anything like that?
I don't know. I mean, I hope so, but I guess for me, it's always like the
comic first.
The comic first, and I'm so grateful that I hope we don't come across as assholes when we meet people, but it's not the goal. It's for me, and I do think there's also, as much as I'm talking about the letters pages, I do, I'm a fairly private person, and even though I have sort of this letters column persona, I like that people don't know us very well. I'd rather have you know the work, I guess, and there's a little bit of mystery about us.
Sure.
This is all sounding extremely obnoxious, which is why as soon as this is over, I'm going to go back into hiding.
Well, Brian, it's over. Thank you
Yes.
so much for taking the time. I
It was
appreciate
a real
it.
pleasure. Thanks. Great questions.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Off Panel with writer Brian K. Vaughan. You can find him on Instagram at Brian K. Vaughan and his work in comics like Saga, Paper Girls, and the upcoming print release of The Walking Dead, The Alien for local comic shop day. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Andrew Nikovic, Nathan House, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kangas, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Connor Farner, Vita Yala, JDC and Mac Anyan, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kukachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Heifeld, Fiona Staples, Chris Hallren, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.